What's up, everyone? Welcome back to this episode of the Xtra Mile Podcast. This season has just been rocking and rolling with rock stars right here in our hometown area, and I'm not disappointing you this week either because I've got my man Mike Tolliver in studio ready to help you guys guide through your journey based off of some of the lessons he's learned on his, so stay tuned for this awesome episode with Mike Tolliver.
The Xtra Mile, Mr. Brightside, yeah, I know you heard me. Stop this movement that's moving, well, you gon' have to murder me. Overcome adversity, my whole life. Bobby Jones, Mr. Brightside, and this is the Xtra Mile.
Woo! All right, guys, we are here. We're ready to rock and roll. This is awesome, dude, to have you here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I'm stoked. It's kind of cool, guys. So a lot of you have heard of me talk about master networks in the podcast. Master networks is something that's important to me. It's about relationship building. It's about truly insulating yourself in your local community. And what was really cool is I had a good friend of mine in Paris Patton who was a friend and an insurance agent as well for me, who had exited his business, which we'll get into, I'm sure. And in walks this gentleman to try and fill those shoes, which was a tough feat. But I don't think that there's a man better suited for the job. So Mike Tolliver is that man. He is a wealth of knowledge. His intelligence intimidates me to a certain degree. So I'm sure we're going to get into some cool conversations today. You're not going to want to miss this one. Mike, welcome to the show, my friend.
Well, yes, and thank you for that introduction.
Yeah, man. Tell everybody a little bit about yourself real quick before we get into your story, okay? So tell them, who you are, what you do, that kind of thing, and then we'll get into how you got there.
Okay. So Mike Tolliver, CEO, principal agent of the Tolliver Agency, one-stop financial shop.
Yes,
right?
it is.
That's the tagline. So have been very intentional throughout my career to add any number of services and products that people might need in the financial, personal finance world, to bring that under one umbrella. And the final step in that process was to purchase a P&C, what's called Property and Casualty book of business. And that was Paris's book. Nice. As he retired, he was a 15-year Allstate agent, very successful at what he did. And, was looking for somebody to maintain the continuity of that book.
For sure.
Because he cared that much about his customers. He didn't want them just going to Allstate Corporate, which, is great customer service, but it's not that community presence if you're just dealing with a 1-800 number or,
right.
An online presence.
Sure.
So, I brought that service to his customer base along with a skill set that he did not have, and that's, a 10-year career in the financial services industry.
Gotcha.
So kind of lumping all of those things together has been my goal.
Yeah.
And, here 2 years in, we've done that.
Yeah.
So.
It's such a cool approach. Yesterday, on the last episode of the podcast, we were talking about the value brought by having the connections to those people, right? If you're an insurance agent and you need to have your client taken care of in the financial planning world, usually you're reliant on a connection to do so, whereas you've brought that under one and just added more value to the clients you can serve, which is admirable. We'll talk a little bit about that too, because there's some, there's a lot of niche down, focus on one specific thing and only that specific thing, recommendations being placed into the entrepreneurial world, right? The advice is there very often. So we'll dive into that and see how you've kind of like mastered the craft of offering multiple services to your customers. But let's go early life, Mike Tolliver. You're not from here. He's here in Kent County, but you're not from this area, right? Where are you from?
So like, where do I drive to from work every day, or
No.
like born and raised?
Yes,
okay.
sir.
So born and raised in St. Louis.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay.
And Midwest boy, Cardinals fan, diehard. Pujols is back with the Cards. It's great to see him back with Yachty. So can talk baseball all day.
Okay. I got some friends in St. Louis who are huge hockey fans.
Sure, the Blues.
The Blue. And I mean, when I say huge hockey fans, they're actually not the tallest people in the world, but they are huge fans. And they go to as many games as they possibly possibly can. But go ahead. There's a lot of camaraderie out there amongst the fans in St. Louis. That's for sure.
Sure, and very, very loyal.
Yeah.
And so we're excited to St. Louis is getting an MLS team.
Oh, nice.
And
Okay.
I was most recently out visiting my family. Got to see the stadium that they're building for that. It's going to be gorgeous. But
nice. These stadiums are out of this world these days too, by the way. Like
Yeah.
some of the stuff they're implementing in these stadiums. I can't wait to see the one in Vegas that they just did for football. It's just, there's so much. There's so much. Yeah. Yeah. It's cool.
Yeah. And the parallels that you get between sports stadiums and like building of cathedrals.
Yeah.
You know, you start to think a little bit deeper about the religious observances, the rites that you do at a, the tomahawk chop or, whatever it is, Sweet Caroline in Boston. You know, there's some parallels there. You can get.
He's a deep thinker, guys.
Yes, I do what I can. Anyway. So born and raised in St. Louis.
Yeah.
Moved to Boston, moved to Denver, and now here in Delaware.
Okay. Boston, and where'd you say?
Denver.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Boston, been one time, love it up there. Although I can't handle the cold, bro.
Yeah.
Like we went in October and I'm telling you, it was October, we did Salem, we did the witch trial tours and all that stuff. And bro, I looked like an Eskimo and I was still freezing.
Yeah.
And that was October.
Yep.
I can't imagine January, February in Boston.
And it gets even colder, of course, when you go further north into Maine.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
But it was like, it's a different, I mean, I've been to cold places before, but
sure,
it's a different cold. Like it's coming off the water at you. Like it's just, I don't know, man. I was not properly prepared. I bought a coat while I was up there because I was like, I'll be fine in this hoodie. It's October. Nope. I had a coat. I had my wife. So many of our pictures, I have my wife's like sparkly scarf on because I'm just trying to and she's built for that a little bit better than I am because she likes the cold. But man, it was not fun. Anyway, Boston. Other than that, we were there when the Red Sox won the World Series.
Okay.
Which was
time?
Cool. The most 2019, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I know. It's been so many now, but it was a drought for a long time. So.
Well, yeah.
But anyway, so what took you to Boston from St. Louis?
So I was recruited out of grad school. I finished up grad school in St. Louis, and a local, what had been like a Midwestern financial planning firm that had a niche with physicians. This kind of connects to your question about niche versus comprehensive. Their niche was physicians, and they were working with physicians across the Midwest. They recruited me to do financial services, but when they were recruiting me, I'd actually been wanting to get out to Boston. My sister had lived there for 15 years with her husband. They moved out for grad school and stayed. They'd just given birth to my nephew, of whom I am the godfather,
right?
And wanted to move out there. So they're recruiting me, and I talked them into having me open their regional office for the entire New England region. And sure enough, stars aligned, and I moved out there in 2013, like January 1st, 2013. Started doing business with physicians that were finishing training at like Harvard, Yale,
wow.
Dartmouth, and Brown. And that was my first job in the industry.
Wow. So wait, okay. So if you're being recruited for something like that and then have the ability to convince them to open an office basically around you and your efforts, you had to have been doing something to get their attention. So let's talk about that. Like where does this start for you?
So the owner of the firm, his brother, who worked, alongside, not as a partner, but as, 5 years later, come alongside and decide to join in. He had a very similar background to me. And so I had a master's in Divinity, Theology, and Philosophy. He had a master in philosophy with a theology bachelor's degree. And, we, wanting to go into academia, were facing, at the time, a job market that was like 700 applicants to one non-tenure track position.
Oh, wow.
And I'm kicking the tires on getting a PhD, taking on student loans to do it, and then facing that job market. And it's not really making a whole lot of sense to me.
No.
So he, with his master's in philosophy, instead of going to get the PhD, went to work with his brother. loved it, did exceptionally well at it. And when he found out what I was doing, he's like, I got to save this guy from a life of academia and, bring him in. Right. And actually it did wind up being a very, very good fit in the sense that when I went out to New England, probably half of the physicians that graduate from Ivy League schools go on to teach.
Yeah.
They are attending physicians at a teaching hospital, and they love the academic side of things. So even though I was not an academic of medicine, I was an academic and, continued to teach as an adjunct professor of business ethics. So I was teaching at Northeastern while I was up there, and that was kind of how we connected, or I connected with my clients is what I mean to say.
Yeah.
So it wound up being a really good fit. And even though it was a shift from what I was sort of envisioning for my life.
For sure.
It just turned out to be a different kind of education.
Yeah.
I don't view myself in sales. I view myself in financial education.
Yeah. That's so big. There's a couple questions I have here.
Sure.
One, obviously there's a lot of people that set out on this journey to do something with their lives and end up in a totally different spot. And I say that there is, oftentimes we say that's okay. I'm like, that is required. We have to do these things. We have to revisit our plan often. But the thing that stands out to me the most about what you were saying, right? I feel like when we find a way, oftentimes we want to share that with people. Mm-hmm. And most of the time, people are not receptive to that. So what made that conversation with your friend who had found his way out or his way and wanted to share that way with you, what made you receptive to that? And how did that conversation go for you to, abandon your plan and go in a different direction?
Well, I told him no like 4 or 5 times.
To imagine.
So yeah, right. Because it was so different. But that being said, one, he was persistent. Two, he had walked where I had gone before.
Yeah.
And
so he had a little bit of, or a degree of credibility for you that you're leaning into. It's not like he's talking without the knowledge or experience of this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then three, I had a friend from undergrad who was working at that firm. And so I was not unfamiliar with the grand promises and then the lack of delivery in so many different places, right? But the fact that he was actively working there, was actively doing well himself. He was out in Seattle.
The other guy. Right. Okay.
And so he had come in to St. Louis again for, I guess, a national conference. They brought everybody back. And I sat him down. I was like, is this true? Has this been your experience? You have no invested interest in my joining this firm.
Yeah.
Tell me if it's true. And he's like, it is true. It has been my experience that you work hard and you will reap the rewards. And so sure enough, I did. I worked really hard. They were like 80-hour weeks and, unbelievable time, so to speak. But, doors opened for me that I never thought would ever open.
Yeah, that's so huge. But I mean, it just takes a degree of humility, and it takes a degree of, that being receptive to changing your plan is so big. And I feel like I always joke about this, Mike, because I talk about like if we were, trapped in a cave and I found the way out, the first thing that I'm going to do is come back and tell everybody that's in the cave, hey, listen, guys, here's the way out. But you watch this in movies, right? Like we've watched it in Titanic and so many other movies where they're like, no, it's this way. And they're like, no. And then they end up going the wrong way because they wouldn't listen. And it's like, man, how much energy and effort do you put into trying to convince somebody that this is the way out? And so thank goodness that he wanted, and he was persistent. Mm-hmm. And, I'm sure that there was enough of a reward for him to bring you on to make that worth his efforts as well. But thank goodness that you were receptive to it, because I just feel like people are stubborn. We're just stubborn, and the more that we can be open to change, the better we'll do long term. So that's huge, man. That's awesome. Now you brought up being, and we're going to get back to this, but you brought up being a baseball fan. Did you play baseball?
I did not.
Okay.
Actually.
Did you play any sports or anything?
Yes.
Okay.
So I did soccer and track.
Okay.
What is that? Fall and spring.
Okay.
Baseball, my dad really wanted me to be a baseball player. So his dad was actually in the Cardinals farm system.
Oh, wow.
He never made it to pro, but I think he was like AAA.
Okay.
So he really wanted me to be a baseball player.
Sure.
And I just, I was out in right field. I was kicking the grass, like just staring at the sky. Like it was not engaging for me at that time.
Yeah.
Years later as a fan, and in 2013, this is why I asked, I went to game 1 of the World Series, Cardinals versus the Red Sox.
Oh, okay.
Bucket list item. Nothing compares to that experience kind of thing.
Did the Cardinals win that game?
They did not,
okay.
unfortunately.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I went to my first Sixers game. It was it wasn't quite the finals this past year, and we lost. And it was sad because we had good seats and we were right there, big Sixers fans, and we lost. But that oftentimes happens. I mean, so, but okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just curious. I always talk about that. I talk about this often. There's a degree of like just the coach to athlete experience and relationship that translates so well later on in business that I've just observed and noticed. So
Sure.
I was curious of that. So all right, so let's get back to your talking to Harvard doctors leaving school, and those people are your ideal client while you're in Boston, correct? Am I understanding correctly?
At that time,
yeah. At that time. Okay. So let's go. So how does that progress for you? How do you end up on your journey away from Boston?
Yeah. So I guess 2 main components to that. The first is I did really well at it, meaning that I grew my client base very, very quickly. That's in part due to how many physicians were finishing those programs in that area, but also due in part to just like I was putting 80 hours in. Like it was a lot of work.
Was there anything that you're doing that you were doing, right? Like spending 80 hours, 20 of it was probably the most productive stuff, right? Well, was there something that you were doing that was really working that you think is just to credit for your success at that time?
So I would use the 40-hour work week to process all my business.
Okay.
And then anything outside of that, because everybody else was working during those hours,
right,
was spent meeting with clients, doing events at really ritzy and expensive places to draw new folks in.
Okay.
And create those opportunities for referrals. And I actually got it to the point where I found if I had 25 clients, for every 25 clients, I would get 1 referral a month.
Oh, wow.
From those 25. So I was working to grow my existing client base to the point where I could just stop doing those networking events.
Sure.
Because they were going to come to me anyway. And it was at that time that I actually got recruited by the largest independent broker-dealer in the nation.
Okay.
And it turned out they basically recruited everybody for that company that was on the coasts.
Okay.
So I was the first to jump ship, and then within 2 weeks, everybody else had left to that same firm.
Follow the leader, man.
It was a little bit. It was a little bit. And I'd done well enough that I could kind of write my own ticket.
Yeah.
Well, at the same time, I move out to Boston. One of my best friends from grad school moves to Denver. And so I'm out there visiting. One of my physicians takes a fellowship in Vail, sports medicine, you might imagine.
Okay.
One of the top sports medicine fellowships in the nation. So I'm going out with him, meet his whole program, and they're now clients, and just like in the course of travel, fall in love with the area. So I get recruited by this other company, largest in the nation. I can write my own ticket. They say, where do you want to go? And I said, I want to go to Denver.
Yeah, right.
And so, I did transition out there, and it was great. Spent 3 years there. About 2 weeks after moving, met the woman who would become my wife.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And she has family in Delaware.
Oh, what the heck? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So that's what brings you here.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. So wow. So the journey to Denver brings you to your wife and your family. That's amazing. It's so crazy how life plays out, right? It's weird.
And it's funny because Boston, Denver, Delaware, all hotspots for finance.
Yeah.
But in no point in those transitions was going to a hotspot for finance even at the forefront of my mind.
Wow.
It was just where I had family or friends that I wanted to move to.
Yeah.
And it worked out really, really well.
Yeah. That's awesome. So that brings you here.
That brings me here.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about the transition from Denver to Delaware. Why do you guys make that move back out here?
So we had been married for 1 year. It was actually our anniversary trip. We used to, and then the pandemic hit, but we used to go to national parks for our anniversary. So we're on a 14-hour drive from Denver to Grand Tetons and Yellowstone.
Okay.
To go there for one of the most amazing trips that we've had. But as you might imagine, that's a lot of time in the car together with nothing else to do but talk. And so we're talking about our future. And I'd spent time on the East Coast in Boston, fell in love with it. Her family is in Pittsburgh, her parents, or Delaware. And so we're talking about laying down roots, building a family. Where do you want to go? If we're going to be close to her family, I want to be on the coast again. And so Delaware was really the only option in that case. Really?
That's interesting. I mean, I love Delaware, but it's, the idea that people outside of Delaware would choose this as a destination is a little unique, I think.
Sure.
Most of the time when I'm trying to convince or tell people where Delaware is, I'm like, okay, it's below Philadelphia. Like, I have to tell them about a city instead of my state, but it works. And
sure.
But I love Delaware for all the reasons that I've said on this show so many times. But it's a cool spot. Why is Delaware a hot spot for finance in general?
Well, in part, the state laws are extremely favorable to corporations in the states.
For sure.
So that's the first part.
Okay.
And then, the second part is with the number of companies that locate their, the situs for their businesses here, then banking is very, very common to be done here as well.
Gotcha. Okay.
So the jobs are plentiful in those specific industries.
Nice.
Yeah.
We've talked about this a little bit before, but I just wanted to make sure that my listeners had some context to that as well. So,
sure.
Yeah. So when you move here, what's the move for your business? I mean, is it still connected to the company that you were working with in Denver?
No, excellent question. So each time I made a transition, I was basically starting from scratch.
Right.
So that's a huge change, and every company that recruits is aware of that. So they're typically going to provide what they call transition assistance, where they basically pay you for the lost revenue that you're going to have by virtue of picking up everything and moving.
Gotcha.
So that helped with the transition, but yeah, in my industry, it's very, very common for people to say, if you can make it 5 years, then you're set. But the washout rate up to 5 years is incredibly high.
Sure.
So moving from Boston to Denver to Delaware then basically said, I'm willing to take on the risk of washing out again in those 5 years. Mm. So when the opportunity came to purchase Paris's book, that was a way to leverage the 15 years of his, starting from scratch and then building a successful company.
Right.
It was an easy way for me to say, I've been here for a year, it's going well, but I'd rather like to shortcut 14 more years if I could.
Yeah.
And so I did, and that has been very, very, very good.
Right. I have some questions about that. Obviously, let's not get into financials, but like what is the process of buying someone's book of business in the insurance world look like? I mean, what are some of the steps for that to happen?
Yeah. So I've been joking with folks recently because there's a couple of transition opportunities that have come up for other people that I'm helping facilitate in some degree. Commercial sale of property or business asset, meaning like your company.
Sure.
It's the Wild West.
Yeah,
it is
really
not like you buy a house as a resident and this is your new home. There's tons of regulation, tons of best practices that basically everybody follows.
Okay.
In the commercial space, every business is so unique and every property is so often tailored to specific interests of the business that you can do or require just about anything of the seller, or as the buyer, demand anything from an interested, right? Like,
yeah. The deal might not happen, but you can ask for and request anything. Yeah.
Just about anything.
Yeah.
And so, you ask, what's the process like? Well, it can be it's very difficult to describe.
Yeah.
What I can say is that there's usually a back and forth in terms of the price. Price is usually based on some sort of multiple.
Yeah.
The multiple depends on the revenue of the business and what the source of that revenue is. And
Right.
usually the source is a distinction between transactional or recurring revenue.
Correct. Yeah. So I'm familiar with that to a certain degree. I just didn't know, the book of business. But go ahead, continue, because I'm sure my listeners would love to really understand that. So,
Yeah.
and the reason I'm sure everybody understands is that the recurring is revenue that's going to continue to happen because of the work that's already been done, where the transactional stuff is going to be required work to continue.
Right.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Right. And then the source of that, either transactional or recurring revenue, how heavily dependent is that on the person who's walking out the door?
Right.
So if a business owner has done a lot of work to make themselves replaceable, that business is going to be more valuable to a buyer because they're coming in with potentially no knowledge of either that business specifically or that industry broadly.
Yeah.
So I've actually met other insurance agents that are retired military, and they bought a practice because they want to be entrepreneurs. They wanted to short circuit the time of starting, but they have no industry experience, right?
Right.
They can be extremely successful, but it depends on the practice that they're purchasing.
Correct.
How hard that road to success is.
Yeah.
And for some of them, it's turnkey. For others, it's extraordinarily difficult.
Yeah.
So-
I mean, because you can buy a full-time job for yourself, and that's interesting. I've been looking at this for some other businesses and stuff like that. The multipliers for different industries, for different structures, like you're saying, it is a little wild. So when you say the wild, wild west, I always look at the commercial property real estate is the same daggone way. We were talking about that recently too on the show. It's like, I can't wrap my head around some of that. Like, I'll see two identical properties. They'll have $400,000 difference between the two of them. I'm like, what the world is happening? It's just one person's naming their price and the other one's naming their price. And we'll see which one goes first, but it's kind of crazy. So, all right. But that's cool. And obviously I've got a place in my heart for Paris because, he was just and he is a great friend and, still a Master Networks member and part of, what we're doing every day with his new company. And so, that's awesome. How's that played out for you? Since that's come to be, what were some bumps and bruises that you might have experienced in doing so that, our listeners might take, some value in hearing about?
Well, one of the things that motivated Paris's retirement was that Allstate, the primary carrier that we use, was changing their operating model, where it was going from more of develop a book of business and love on that book to grow and growth oriented, and we're going to change compensation to reflect the growth orientation rather than the sit and squat on a book. And there was just a huge exodus from 2020, 2021, 2022 of agents that didn't really align with that vision. From a personal standpoint, I'm a growth-oriented person, so I'm not intimidated by that at all. But you talk about challenges then in picking up the practice. There were no systems, processes, people in place that were on board with a growth-oriented agency. And what's more, compensation for me, the agency owner, changed in significant ways 3 times in my first year.
Wow.
So as I'm trying to put my finger on exactly how I'm going to grow this practice for success.
Right. What you should spend your time on. Yeah.
It's a moving target. And so I basically had to say, here's what I want to do. I'll do whatever it takes to make the interested parties happy and continue to pursue my vision. And that was kind of the first real big challenge, was figuring out exactly what it takes to make those other folks happy while I'm growing the agency I've always wanted to build.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100% does. I just think the big puzzle piece there is that what he was not interested in, you were the most interested in, which was the growth. So without that, the rest of this would probably not have fit so well.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, but I imagine that was frustrating, and having to focus on your goal while including theirs. It's a great strategy. There's a lot of times where people, and if you're listening and you're in a position where your company is setting your goals for you and telling you what goal you want to hit, I would encourage you to set your own goals and make them matter to you, because if it's assigned from your company, it's not going to be something that matters to you as much. What Mike did in this situation, he's like, this is what I want to accomplish over here. I need to do those things, so I have to include them in my big why, but my actions are fueled by what I'm trying to accomplish, so this becomes part of mine.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's big. So, hey guys, the Xtra Mile Podcast is brought to you by Brightside Roofing, and I want to thank everybody over at the Brightside team real quick, because without them, this wouldn't be possible. We started Brightside in 2013. It was my uncle, my cousin, and my brother who started it, and since that time, we have grown to serve over 350 roofing customers per year, and it means a lot to us, because when someone chooses Brightside for their new roof, we know that it'll be the last roof that they have to put on that home. And so they could sleep comfortably underneath that roof for a lifetime. Guys, if there's anybody that you know that needs a new roof, you can count on Brightside to be the company that they can trust. Thanks again, and let's get back to the show. Take that for what it's worth, guys. Any advice to the listeners on that in general? Just that same strategy or that same idea?
Let's see, advice in that way that would be applicable to all different potential scenarios. That's hard. What I would say is we often think of challenges as a zero-sum game. It is either this or this, and I must fight for the thing that I want because it cannot coexist with this other thing.
Yeah.
And what I would say is so much of life is not zero-sum. And it is so easy for us to slip into that mindset that if you can expand your vision to say, how can I do this and this, then everybody is happy. And if you can create those scenarios, you're going to succeed because everybody is excited at that success.
Mm-hmm. That's big.
So that's probably what I would say.
Good stuff. So where does this take you now? Like, what's next in your journey at the Tolliver agency?
Yeah, so it's been a wild ride these first 2 years. The first year was kind of figuring out what needed to be done.
Yeah.
The second year has been doing it, and we're now at a place where we have an excellent team. Everybody is aligned for the goals that we have. We started with 2 employees. We're now at 5. I'm loving it. And the timing couldn't be better that the ship can kind of run itself, because my wife is expecting our second child literally any day. And before, I did not get any paternity leave. It was literally, we went to the hospital Friday night, had a baby, and I was back at work for a 40-hour week Monday morning. This year I'm taking two weeks, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm going to get some
Good
paternity leave.
Yeah.
So that's
and how many children do you guys have?
This will be number 2.
Okay. Alrighty. We were like scheduled at 11 o'clock, and I was like at 11:01, because I just know you're a punctual guy. I was like, did something? are they having a baby now? So, but I'm glad to have you here. Thank you for making time. I joked before the show, before we started rolling, that he should keep his notifications on just in case.
Yeah.
But we do appreciate you making time for the show for sure.
You bet.
So it's cool. That's awesome. So that's exciting. Business wise, what's the goals for the Tolliver agency, for you as an individual? What is it that you're trying to accomplish while serving the community in the way that you have?
Yeah. So really excited about year 3.
Okay.
There's a number of big things that are going to be happening for the agency. I'll say the first is we have met and exceeded the goals required to have a second location. So we're going to either open one from scratch or buy another retiring advisor's book of business in 2023.
Okay.
So I'm super excited about that. I would love to have a location in each county of Delaware.
Yeah.
That's kind of the longer term vision. So this one would be ideally in Newcastle County. If I can get it within 10 miles of the PA border, then my carrier will open the entire state of Pennsylvania to me to write business in. Currently, we write business in Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, and West Virginia. When I took over the agency, we only wrote in Delaware and Maryland.
Okay.
So this has been intentional geographic expansion for the sake of essentially, the transition to West Virginia and Virginia about doubled the population that we served.
Right.
Adding PA would add like another 60%.
Wow.
Just because it's such a large population.
Yeah, for sure.
So those are some significant things. Currently, I'm the only one in the agency that does financial services, which is actually more than most agencies. So let's start there.
Right.
That's great.
Yeah. Take some credit.
I really, really want to hire somebody to help me with that.
Okay.
And there's a number of reasons why that's ideal, even from the client's perspective, because if I'm out for 2 weeks on paternity leave, like who's going to service the account? So, things along those lines are going to be really strategic coming down the road for this next year. In addition, probably the worst kept secret in Dover is that the Green Stinger is moving locations. That's because our property has been purchased by a company that intends to tear the strip down. So I have to move.
Oh, damn.
And, have been sort of up in the air as to when that move will happen. But we're going to upgrade our digs at that time, whether that means renting or buying. I've actually been working with a realtor that you may know and love in our Master Networks group to try to identify a space. Supply is pretty tight, so it may end up being a rental. But whatever it is, we're going to have much nicer digs moving forward, and I'm very excited about that as well.
That's good. Yeah.
So those are the big things that are coming for the practice.
That's so big. So it's interesting how we talked about the basically how a lot of us look at the this or that situation, where you were just talking about how we can do the this and that situation as long as we're disciplined with it. We talked about this a little bit in the beginning, where a lot of companies niche down and focus on one specific thing. Why is it so important to you to have the financial piece available as well as the property and casualty insurance to your clients? And why does that matter to your clients?
Yeah, so there's two answers to that question, and I'll start with the personal narrative. I feel like people like stories. So when I was working with physicians, I was doing comprehensive analysis for these folks that would basically lay out 30, 40, 50 years of their financial future. And I would tightly pack it together in this wonderful snowball that was like, this perfect sphere. Let me hand it to you. Good luck and Godspeed. And how much of it actually got done?
Probably very little.
Very little. These people are themselves working 80-hour weeks.
Right.
I mean, just like any number of pressures, plus they're not industry experts.
Right.
So
yeah.
I really hated to do all of this work to see it not happen and benefit them the way that I knew that it could.
It would, yeah.
So it was at that time that I was like, I need to bring all of these things in-house for quality control purposes, essentially. The customer experience would always be better if the people that were doing it were the people that I had direct authority over to ensure it got done properly, and
right.
that, like all that stuff.
Sure.
So that's kind of the personal drive that I've had since I started in the industry.
But that's the financial planning part of it, correct?
Well, I actually got licensed in property and casualty back in 2014.
Oh, okay.
And it was in part so I could advise on those pieces
areas
of the puzzle, even though I wasn't writing the
Gotcha.
Policies myself.
Oh, okay. I understand now.
But yeah, so it's all a part of the deal, so to see. But as much of that as I could bring in-house, the better for my clients.
Yeah.
Now that's the first answer. The second answer is I used to have a very, some people go after a niche model. Other people go for a comprehensive model. There's plenty of money to be made. Customers need both. Let's coexist happily in the same space. I have come to find out that some folks in the niche market don't return that favor. Meaning,
that's right. And honestly, as you were explaining that a second ago, I could see that. I was literally playing that through in my mind. I'm like, there's probably times where you put this plan together, and then the part that you roll, the role that you play in that plan, and the part that another person plays in that plan, they could direct that person a different direction than you, just as easily as you could direct them to them.
So when it comes to explaining whether or not I think it's good business to like double down on a niche or to build a comprehensive business, my go-to example is, what does Amazon do?
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm asking you, what does Amazon do?
They sell pretty much everything.
They sell everything.
Yeah.
Not only do they sell everything as an online retailer, but they own the digital real estate, right?
Yeah.
Amazon S3.
Yeah.
They also own the platform for distribution.
Yeah.
On and on and on. Like, they own it all. What if somebody said, hey, Jeff, you're just a bookseller.
Right.
Just be really good at selling books.
Which they did, from what I hear.
For a time.
Yeah.
That's how they got famous.
Apparently that friend was as persistent as your friend was that brought you in. Good. Yeah. Cause I mean, he got told he should sell more than books multiple times before he finally conceded, from what I understand of the story. So, but yeah.
And how much quicker could they have gotten to where they are now?
Oh, absolutely.
So the value add to everybody along the chain, from the owner of the business to the client to the employees, right? Everybody involved. And then of course the community that you're in, I think is better off if you go from a comprehensive model. And we could talk about the things that, as a business owner, doing comprehensive insulates you from that. That's an attractive deal. I think that there's some buyer beware if you're going to go the comprehensive route that you need to be aware of as well. But on the whole, I think that the pros far outweigh the cons when done well.
Gotcha.
So
yeah, it's huge. Man, there's so many different directions I can go on this. Chaz Wilson, who was on the show a few weeks ago, he's the CEO of Master Networks. He talks about when you're going to have different offerings, be sure that they are within a 3 foot radius, is basically how he says, like, it's in arm's length, right? And so, for me, Master Networks was an example of that. I was so dove into Master Networks at the time with Brightside that when the opportunity to buy Master Networks came, I was like, at first I said no, right? I was like, it's not what I want to do. But I was able to, play a role in growing something that was also benefiting me and helping others so much. And so, but it is super interesting. I look at the different industries, and I look at my industry, for example, and there's so many people that try to do everything and end up doing nothing as a result. I think that is different than what you're doing and the client that you're serving, because you're bringing so much value to them through what you're offering versus the person who is the jack of all trades, but is 100% not the master of any. So it's interesting. There's different for every industry. This is a little bit different. And I think that, like you said, there's some reality to double downing on your niche. And then there's some reality to offering the more comprehensive plan.
And the truth is, like, I support those folks that want to go niche.
Yeah.
But what I was realizing is that I'm not always supported going comprehensive by the folks who do
interesting.
niche. So it's an interesting dynamic, but you're absolutely right. And so I mentioned the pros and the cons, and the con is exactly what you were starting to allude to. Doug Ferris, who I know you interviewed
Doug
recently
was
as well.
Recently, yeah.
He's fond of saying, which I really like the saying, if you have too many irons in the fire, none of them get hot.
Yeah.
And it's true, if your focus, time, and attention is split across too many things.
Right. This is where discipline, it has to be. Yeah.
It doesn't get done.
Yeah.
And it's also where if you take the warning that little wisdom saying provides, and then you apply it properly to your business. I have never written a home, auto, or umbrella policy, and I've been an agency owner for 2 years.
Right.
I've never done it personally, but we've done a lot of home, auto, and umbrella policies.
Yeah.
And it's because I have wonderful staff who are specialists in that area. Now I need to know enough to advise on it.
Yeah.
And that's great. I do that all the time, but I've never actually put one in place.
Yeah.
You call in because a car you sold and you bought another one. I've never made that change.
Right.
Right. I have awesome operations staff who are able to handle that and get it done right. So even though the Tolliver agency does all these things, Mike Tolliver is really only doing the financial services, which is what I've done my entire career.
Gotcha. Okay.
So
I love that explanation, and it opens up a question to you that is personal to me because I own a roofing company and I've never done a roof before.
Mm-hmm.
But with that being said, I can guarantee without any question that we will do a roof better than anybody else can do a roof, and it's because of the people.
Yep. Not
because of me necessarily. I mean, there's some of that, you know, the stuff that trickles upwards is never the good stuff. The credit goes to everybody else. The blame goes to me. But you know, there's obviously a lot of things that we've done research wise, making sure the right products are in place, making sure that we're only offering specific products that will play into the value added to the customer at the end of the day. But how do you think the public receives that? You know, because not always do we get the chance to explain everything else when people hear Mike Tolliver has never wrote a policy for something that you want them to choose Mike Tolliver or the Tolliver agency for. The same thing for me. I think that there have been times where, like even on a social media piece of content, I'll get the negative comment from somebody who's like, yeah, I'm going to choose your company and you've never even done a roof before. Okay. So what do you think about that as a general, you know, just in general, what do you think about that?
First, I think it needs to be presented in a way that is understandable to whoever's going to hear.
For sure.
So I don't ever lead with that when I'm talking with somebody.
Hire me. I've never done a roof.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
Hey, don't use that as a clip. Okay?
But you're exactly right. Like that's received in a way that isn't, it's communicating what you're not trying to communicate.
Right. Exactly.
What you have done is you have built a fantastic roofing company who will give someone a 50-year roof that's actually going to last 50 years, and they're going to be thankful that they paid for one 50-year roof instead of 3 15-year roofs, right? Like that's...
Clip that. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's spot on.
The vision that you always had, and if you were the one up there swapping out the shingles, it was not going to get built.
Right.
So that's how I will frame it is like, yeah, I've never written the policy. You don't want me writing the policy.
No.
It is so much better if Michaela, my sales manager, writes the policy.
Absolutely.
So that's how I position it.
Yeah. It's huge, right? And it is how we communicate our message to our market. But it is interesting that, you know, we're sitting here having this conversation. It's like, yeah, I mean, you know, I used to talk about that a lot. And, you know, the other thing that I used to talk about, and I'll get your input on this too, because I used to talk about this, I think, without maybe providing the right context that goes along with it, because, you know, as you know, we're not the cheapest roofer out there. There's no way that we could be bringing the value that we are. And so oftentimes I tell people that we're probably the most expensive, at least in this area, And because there's master networks and the different conversations of like price increases and things like that, I've come from this position of like, I own the idea that we're the most expensive and talk about that without always providing the clarity of it's also connected to the best available products, the best available warranty, the best available installers, right? All of those things. How could I possibly be the cheapest? And so I think it's important for us to make sure that we continue to maintain our value proposition in that conversation, because otherwise, like, they're only going to hear what they want to hear. Right. And so it's so important. There's a joke that we have at our company, but it's a very real joke. If we're $14,000 for a roof and the competitor is at $11,000, to your point that you made a second ago, that guy's the more expensive guy every single time, without question. And it's funny to see people's reactions when you say that, because they're like, what do you mean they're $3,000 less? I'm like, for what they're offering, I'd probably be at $8,000, but I would never offer those products. And for that reason, I'm only going to offer and maintain the position that we have here with the better products that are going to serve you. Yep. And so anyway, those are that's the conversation I would love to have with everyone. I just don't always get that time.
Yeah.
But this is cool. Mike, you've been involved with Master Networks. How has, in an industry that you're in, how has relationships played out for you in the growth of you as an individual, but also in the growth of you and your business?
Yeah. So in the personal finance industry, personal is, the primary word there. Yeah. And so relationships are everything. Yeah. And I do know that a number of property and casualty, either companies or agency owners, salesmen, whoever they are, view it as a transactional business. And I will never be that guy.
Oh, man.
Because the relationship is what is so key. If somebody is going to place their policy with me, insurance is nothing more than a promise. And if I can't deliver on every single one of my promises, then why am I in this industry?
Wow.
So I have to be about the relationship, and I have to be employing people that understand that, so that their corner of the job gets done in a way that our customers know their promises are being honored. So, you talk about the power of relationships. It's all relationships. Yeah. And we're actually in a process right now where we're trying to identify who has and has not taken us up on the depth our relationship can go, and trying to get them to go deeper is the short way to say it. But that's our motivation. Yeah. And, I'm not looking for necessarily the $5 million retiree that's looking to invest $5 million with me. I'd love to work with them, but that's not who I'm trying to identify.
Sure.
There's a girl who just moved into her first after-school apartment, got her first job, and we're placing the auto and the renter's policy. She wanted to open up her first retirement account with me. Awesome. Like, you're literally the person I had in mind when I purchased the PNC agency.
Wow.
Even though I might make $50 in the first year, I now am going to work with you for the next 40 years.
Yeah.
And I think that's awesome.
Right.
So I'm excited to see her career grow. I'm excited to place all the products she's going to need along the way and know that they are the best possible fit for her. Right? Like, so that's the stuff that gets me excited.
Absolutely.
And she just called in 2 weeks ago, and I was like, hey, I'm sorry, I've got all these meetings because I'm trying to get them in before I'm on paternity leave. And so, she's sharing congrats and like, what's going on in your world, like that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So
that's so big. I love that. That's a peek into your why you do what you do versus what you do. Right. And so that's so cool. Mike, you and I could wrap probably all day, but I'm going to try to keep this manageable for our listeners and our followers. Sure. So let's get into, I have a question that I ask everybody that comes on the show, and that is, excuse me, of course, that's the moment I decide I need a drink of water or something. So again, I tell everybody, like, the whole premise of this, there's a quote from Brian Tracy, that your success in life will be in direct proportion to what you do after you do what you are expected to do. Okay. And so the extra mile, that's kind of like an explanation or description or definition of the extra mile to me. And so with that being said, can you talk about a time, whether in your business or in your life, where going the extra mile played out well for you in the future and just paid you back over and over?
Yeah. It's a great question. And I love the question for a couple of different reasons. So I mentioned that I have a master's in divinity, and the origin of the extra mile phrase, to my understanding, is Jesus talking about being compelled by a centurion in the ancient world to carry his shield and equipment for 1 mile. And if you're asked to do that, then you go another mile without being asked. And so it's the same kind of concept, but my understanding is that's the origin of that phrase. And Roman centurions could compel anyone to do this, right? You're just alongside the road, they're defending the kingdom, so you better do it or we're going to cut you down, kind of thing. So it's this thing that you're not doing because you want to, you're doing it because you're obligated with the threat of death.
Yeah.
But you're taking this like negative thing and turning it into an act of service.
Yeah.
To someone who really doesn't even deserve it.
Yeah. Okay.
And so as I kind of understand that origin of the phrase, I'm thinking of circumstances in my career where it actually hurt me to do the thing that needed to be done and then to go that extra step.
Yeah.
And I guess the first thing that comes to mind is when I was in grad school, I worked at a company in their marketing department that did not appreciate its employees.
Gotcha.
That's the context. They had written a grant. This is a nonprofit, by the way. It's supposed to be people-oriented, but they did not, appreciate their employees. So they'd written a grant for $100,000 to redevelop their website. And it was for the purpose of distributing this content that they were creating to the third world who could not pay for it. So, that's kind of the context. Me and a coworker in the marketing department, most junior position that you can have, decided to develop a website on our own over the course of our spring break to then say, you don't have to pay a company $100,000 to do this. You could develop it in-house, make it look better, function better, and cost about a third, even if you were paying one person full-time to do this thing. And then we presented it to everybody from the VP on down in our department. And we started that conversation by saying, if you could build a website tomorrow that did everything that you wanted, what would it include? And so they start naming like all these different things. And then me and my friend Chris, who had just spent the week developing a website, pulled it up and said, here's something we did in 1 week that does all these things you just listed. And, jaws kind of hit the floor, and we realized that we had basically just shifted everyone's thinking from, okay, we're going to take this grant of $100,000, give it to this third party company. Let's do it in-house. So that was not something that we were necessarily compelled to do, but, I learned a ton through that process. Here's where the story takes a turn. Chris essentially elbowed me out of the project altogether so that he became the guy to run with this throughout the course of the company. And then I was kind of left in obscurity doing what I was doing the whole time. And he kind of shafted me. So now I have 2 more years of career at this company before I'm done with my graduate degrees and I move on to something else. So what does it look like to serve faithfully in my role, having just been shafted and this essentially passion project that we gave up all this time and treasure for, taken from me? And that was really when the extra mile came into effect. I ended up getting moved over to the IT department from marketing and ended up running and managing the help desk. It's actually in the course of running a help desk for an IT department that I had no desire to be in. How I got there was a really crappy situation, but I learned so much in that setting that I'm literally using the lessons that I learned there in my agency right now as I'm developing systems. I just created a staff portal using open source software called Moodle. How would I know how to do that? It was because of those 2 years in that IT department.
Wow.
Where I chose to serve faithfully, even though I'd been screwed over. So that's where going the extra mile made the difference. And I'm still reaping the rewards from that.
Wow. That's, that might be one of the best answers of the extra mile. That was good. That was good, Mike. Listen, man, great episode. Real quick, I want to make sure that anybody who's listening can follow you on your journey. It sounds like to me you're just getting started, so I don't want them to miss out on what's to come. So where could they follow you on social media, or what would be the best way for them to follow your journey?
Yeah, so we actually have a lot of stuff coming on the social media front. We're still developing a lot of what's going to come out here in the next month or two, but the TolliveraAgency.com is the first place that you can go. There's going to be a lot of content that sort of ends up there.
Okay.
But there will be on Facebook. So just facebook.com/TolliveraAgency. A lot of stuff will hit there. And then we're actually launching a YouTube channel that's going to have more on the educational side of things. Nice. I'm actually really excited about that. I've never done that before, but
yeah, that's a good move.
It doesn't have even a brand yet because you need a certain number of followers before they let you do a lot of that
like
stuff.
A brand account.
Yeah. So I need like 100 subscribers. So if you're listening, right, subscribe once it's out. Please do.
What would the YouTube? Oh, so the YouTube. What's the YouTube? Oh, you don't have a channel yet for it.
Unfortunately, not.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll keep you guys posted on this,
and it will be announced on the Facebook page. So that's where.
Cool. Go to the Facebook page, get all the updates.
Yeah.
Awesome stuff. Mike, thank you for being on the show. Guys, listen, next week, we're going to have an awesome guest on. Keep following us. And one thing I keep trying to emphasize, guys, if there's a topic, we're going into questionable times, inflation, all kinds of crazy stuff happening in the world. If there's a topic that you want us to focus on in conversation on the Xtra Mile podcast, be sure to comment those things so that I can bring the right guest on for you. Until next time, guys, we'll see you.
Thank you for tuning in to the Xtra Mile Podcast. If you're still listening, that means you learned something or you would have turned this off. So make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode of the Xtra Mile